Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, my name is Khairinsa. So today in this video, me and my friends want to talk about what's a set of design principles for developing oral presentation competence, a synthesis of research in higher education. In this study, professional competence is regarded as an overarching concept of being a competent professional that entails a range of underlying competencies, of which giving oral presentation is part of communication competence. The ability to present is also recognized by policy makers around the world as an important qualification of higher education graduates. However, professionals from several domains emphasize that the graduates have the competence to speak in public. So, what's the definition of deafening oral presentation competence? The Greece defines oral presentation competence as the combination of knowledge, skills, and attitudes needed to speak in public in order to inform, self-express, to relate, and to persuade. But there are still many students who have difficulty communicating, so research indicates that communication anxiety can be reduced through practicing a series of oral presentations. Oral presentation courses in higher education should therefore address these various components of oral presentation competence and their interrelatedness. Oral presentation competence in higher education. The acquisition of oral presentation competence has become increasingly essential for a wide range of disciplines within the academic field, such as biology, business, communication, engineering, and health. In a range of higher education curricula, courses are incorporate that center overall presentation skills. More attention is needed to educate communication competence in a universities to develop this competency in higher education. It is emphasized that students and teachers need to understand, especially the importance of developing presentation competencies. And the last, developing oral presentation competence based on several studies conclude that a systematic approach and a comprehensive perspective are required in further research on learning approaches for oral presentation competence development based on the ideas of constructive alignment. Emphasize the following key areas of the curriculum and courses that require alignment. Number one, the instruction. Number two, the learning activities. And number three, the assessment strategy.
Okay, this is the method of toward a set of design principles for developing oral presentation competence, a synthesis of research in higher education. The systematic focuses on the identification and classification of characteristics of the learning environment. This or they effect an underlying argument for developing oral presentation competence in higher education. These studies consisted of the following phases. There are the first or the part's first formulation of criteria conclusion. Firstly, the reported explicitly describe one or more characteristics of the learning environment. The secondly, specific studies published in higher education pertain which focuses of the study. The third, only peer-reviewed articles were included to obtain scientific validity. And the fourth, finally provide an insight into recent scientific literature. The time was restricted publication from 1990 through 2012. The part second is development of search strategy. To increase the effectiveness of the search strategy, the team strictly focused on keyword and synonym for learning environment, considering the independent variable The following keywords were emulated: teaching, pedagogy, and learning. Competence, the keywords examining dependent variable were about presentation competence, oral presentation, presentation skills, and public speech. Educational context was adopting of higher education in the search strategy. This is a field of variety of recognized computerized database was searched in 2012, namely Education or Educational Resources Information Center or ERIC and others. Subsequently, the techniques snowballing was used based on a reference list of previously selected studies into additional relevant article. And part third is identification or relevant publication. After screening the abstract, if necessary, to the full text of the article, we should remove from the select one or selection. There are number one, did not focus on developing presentation skills or competence as the dependent variable. Number two, solely addresses the description of one or more teaching strategies without examining the effect or presentation or competencies. Number three, purely focus on the relationship between student characteristic and oral presentation performance. Synonym for learning environment in the search strategy of this review did not encompass certain specific characteristics of the learning environment in relevant publication, such as behavior modeling or peer feedback. Just focusing on only the environment or only in the empirical studies could have yielded an incomplete picture of diversity of learning environment characteristic. The part four is critical analysis and exploration. The majority of the publication studies the development of oral presentation competence in domain-specific education setting, while 16 studies were carried out into specially designed public speaking courses. Almost 32 studies for publication used qualified methods, interview or observation, and in one publication that were used in combination. The first stages of analysis was conducted by two resources independently and consisted of the identification of the learning environment characteristic and this component and their argument for their relationship were categorized into a big models 2003 per article. The second stage is the first author classified every publication elaborate with conceptual and empirical arguments for the displayed relationship. The three stages, the most cited characteristic of the learning environment, were selected based on their presence in more than 10. This principle is also used in the context of educational sciences. Regarding the purpose of this study to relate learning environment characteristic with oral presentation performance and support with the underlying argument.
Result based on the overall framework in the picture number 1, the section describes the resulting 7 educational design principles for promoting oral presentation competence. In higher education, you can see picture number 2. The sequence of these principles follow the ideas of live course design, 1. Instruction, 2. Learning activities, and 3. Assessment strategy. Firstly, each design principle is related to the theoretical background mentioned in the selected publications, providing the argument for the principle. This first, the theoretical part is constructed following this aspect. 1. The quantity of studies incorporating the particular learning environment's characteristic as a research focus. 2. The promotion of the total reviewed publication addressing argumentations based on the theoretical nations. 3. An overview of all findings of existing conceptual argumentation in the selected publication concerning the impact of the learning environment, characteristic on oral presentation competence or specific components thereof, self-efficacy or anxiety regarding presenting. Secondly, the empirical evidence.
So, in conclusion, the design of learning environments for developing oral presentation competence requires a systematic approach that takes the instruction, learning, and assessment sides of learning environment coin into account. The review studies were systematically categorized with respect to study characteristic, learning environment characteristic or presage, learning process, and outcomes or product. Combining this aspect into the overall model allow for deducing the key learning environment characteristic influencing oral presentation competence or specific components thereof and finding arguments for the relationships in the identified learning process. And a set of seven design principle was formulated showing the effect of characteristic of learning environments for developing oral presentation competence on student performance. Do it intended to conduct theoretical, empirical, practical studies for developing oral presentation competence in higher education. Based on this review, we can conclude three things. There are the first, the set of design principle offers opportunities for an effective and efficient design and the instructional environment for developing oral presentation competence. Both principles might lead to effective and efficient adaptations in higher education curricula, science, the integration of presentation competence development in domain-specific curricula, and the adoption of peers supporting the teacher in feedback process reduce instructional time. Secondly, all seven design principles should be included in learning environment for developing oral presentation competence. All crucial learning environment characteristics for developing oral presentation competence incorporate oral presentation competence incorporate in the seven design principles are mentioned. However, none of these students explicitly examine or discuss the seven principles from a coherent
perspective but studied them in isolation. In this file, a concentrated and systematic approach is needed in order to describe the dedication intervention for developing oral presentation competence from a comprehensive perspective. Combination of the whole set of design principles is needed and relevant for realizing learning environments or encourage competence in practice. Thirdly, the added value of this study lies in the comprehensive perspective and supporting its design principle with underlying theoretical and empirical argumentation supporting this principle in developing oral presentation performance in specific